Hello, I'm Gwen Maggs. I'm the Project Manager for Upstream Thinking at Cornwall Wildlife Trust, and today I'm welcoming you to our online webinar introducing sustainable horse management to farm and land advisors. Here at the Cornwall Wildlife Trust, we've been engaging with the equine sector through our Upstream Thinking project to improve both the land and environment for both horse welfare, but also wider biodiversity. So today we have two speakers. We have Stuart Coleman, he's a farm advisor at Upstream Thinking, and he'll be outlining how we originally became engaged with this subject, but also Stuart Myers, expert in sustainable horse management and founder of Equiculture. So we hope you enjoy the presentations today, and if you have any questions, please do get in touch with us. Thank you.
Hello everyone, and thanks for joining us today for the Healthy Land, Healthy Water and Healthy Horse webinar aimed towards sustainable land management and resource protection advisors. My name is Stuart Coleman, and for a bit of context, I'll tell you a little bit about myself as we get started. I have a career spanning more than 30 years in the environmental sector, mainly in nature conservation in both East Anglia and the Southwest region. The last 15 years have mainly been in landowner advisory services in both Devon and more recently Cornwall, promoting connected landscapes, sustainable land management and natural resource protection. I'm currently one of several farm advisors for Cornwall Wildlife Trust, helping to deliver South West Water's Upstream Thinking project in West Cornwall drinking water catchments. And mainly my work is in the upper catchment of the River Cobar, which is a priority watercourse, drinking water protected area and a nitrate vulnerable zone, but I also do some work in the adjacent Stithians Reservoir catchment as well. My work is mainly providing free and confidential land management advisory services to a range of landowners and land managers, from private small holdings right up to large commercial farms, dairies, etc., and everything in between. My primary focus is water quality improvements through land management and farm infrastructure improvements upstream of a drinking water intake in the River Channel. But as you may expect, my other focus is improvements in wildlife habitats, both those existing habitats which we help to manage and also for newly created ones, natural flood management, robustness of water resources, particularly that's come to mind during recent years with drought events we've had, which has certainly affected the River Cobar, improved soil health and structure, e.g. compaction, soil erosion, soil organic matter, etc., and many other ecosystem services. So some of these improvements which we aim for are delivered by use of agri-environment schemes, certainly stewardship predominantly over the last 2 rounds of funding for our project, and now we're going into a new range of services via the ELM schemes, for instance the Sustainable Farming Incentive, some via identifying grant support, which could be our own Upstream Thinking grants or other externally sourced grants, and some voluntary efforts by the landowners. And in addition, we've also got practical support from a team of volunteers. We run a weekly team of volunteers, and as we do in all of our project catchments, and they would be engaging in practical works which will be identified as important, but perhaps not so much to the landowner from their commercial basis. Many of our supportive tools for this work, and indeed other similar projects, and to many of our listeners, and indeed the legislative guidance in the UK has traditionally been aimed at commercial farmers, those using nutrient inputs, agrochemicals, heavy machinery, have large amounts of livestock as part of their business, they have substantial building infrastructure, and with related income from their business to help deliver change. And yet, amongst a largely farmed landscape, which we usually assume is somewhere in the region of 70% of the landscape, certainly is in Cornwall, there is a scattering of small land ownerships and land rentals, sometimes just a single or a few fields where the primary land management tool are horses. And this sector is increasing as farmers retire, for instance, not to be replaced by their children or relatives, and farmland is sold off and split. At first thought, these may be considered relatively benign holdings compared to the environmental risks related to farms, and yet there are, in my experience, a range of characteristic environmental problems associated with horses. Why, for instance, is there very short grass with little opportunity for wildlife, compacted and damaged turf and topsoil? Why is animal presence for much of the year in all weathers apparently too much grazing pressure on too small an area? Why is manure removed from site but externally sourced fodder brought in? Why are unwanted herbs sprayed off habitually? Why are intestinal wormers routinely used far more than in commercial livestock? So how can we as natural resource managers tackle the negative horse-related issues, the runoff problems affecting water quality and flood risk, the reduced carbon sequestration potential in impoverished soils, bare fields largely devoid of wildlife interest, heaps of unwanted farmyard manure laden with long-lasting wormers, and few funding opportunities or sustainable land management options via agri-environment schemes to make improvements on these horse-managed sites? Are we, in fact, as a sector, underestimating the problems and the opportunities? And how do we engage with horse owners? What can we offer them? Does horse management have to be this way? And then 2 years ago, something interesting happened. A landowner bought 3 riverside fields of approximately 15 acres in the Upper Coper catchment. It was former intensive silage cut pastures on a recently finished dairy business and a holding that had been split up. The fields were a targeted priority for our project for some time, previously implicated in runoff pollution problems, but strategically well placed for natural flood management and habitat restoration potential. I must admit, our hearts dropped when Cornwall Wildlife Trust was approached for advice and support by the new landowner, but we found that the owner had multiple horses. Was this going to be a new set of problems that we'd have to deal with? But hang on, this landowner had a plan. She wanted to change her ryegrass monocultures into complex, deep-rooted multigrass and herb lays. She wanted to plant lots of trees as river buffers and for horse browsing fodder in the longer term. She wanted to plant new hedges to subdivide fields to facilitate rotational regenerative grazing. She didn't want to use herbicides to spray off the weeds or use toxic wormers, and she wanted to install non-permanent hard standing to provide her horses with a foul weather retreat to stop topsoil and grass damage. And she wanted lots of wildlife on site. In fact, she wanted most of the things we would have had on our shopping list. And she said she was a practitioner of equiculture. Had we heard of it? Well, we certainly hadn't, and you'd be amongst friends, because I don't think many people had heard of that term in our sector at that time. But with collaborative working between ourselves and the new landowner and targeted project support, both through sourced grant funding and practical support from our volunteer team, we began a journey towards significant land restoration and increased knowledge on all our parts. The pastures were oversown with diverse seed mixes, including multiple deep-rooted traditional grasses and herbs, which added sward complexity and improved soil condition on what was traditionally poor draining ground in a very high rainfall area. It has improved rainfall infiltration and potentially will improve carbon sequestration. No fertilizers or pesticides have been applied, and this is already improving soil health. Planting of nearly 2,500 native trees and shrubs has been undertaken on site, and this will increasingly provide a range of agroforestry benefits. Wildlife, especially insect and bird life, has noticeably increased in the first 2 years of land ownership change. And this already looks nothing like a typical horse managed holding. Even the horse behaviour to my untrained eye seems to be noticeably different. There are large herbivores becoming an integral part of a restoring landscape. The owner and her horses are affecting positive change, far more than we often manage to achieve on a similar area of farmland. So there is a different way to manage horses, and we decided we needed to talk about it to many horse owners and land managers and natural resource managers alike across Cornwall and across the UK. So to you, the audience, this webinar is the first step in that process. We bring you good news. It is Equiculture. It is a tool to facilitate engagement with horse owners who are not our traditional target for sustainable land management advisory services. It is a tool for horse owners to become part of the collective effort to restoring landscapes and reversing environmental damage. And it is a tool to relink horses with their ecosystem, not semi-wild hardy ponies on the moors or wetlands in a large rewilding project, but riding horses, pet horses, the horses down the road you pat at the field gate, the ones that you thought didn't have a role to play. Healthy land, healthy water, healthy horse. Not my words, but those of one of the architects of Equiculture, sustainable horse management for the 21st century. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce the main speaker of our webinar today, Stuart Myers. Thank you for listening.
Well, thank you for that great introduction, Stuart. And hello, everyone. My name's also Stuart Myers from Equiculture. Today, we're going to talk about ways to help your engagement with the horse community. We're going to talk about the way that horse owners think. We're going to talk about what drives some of that thinking. We're going to talk about some of the blockages that you may have in dealing with horse owners. We're going to talk about some ways they can circumnavigate those, and some ways that once you engage with horse owners, they can be a real asset rather than a problem to your local community. But first of all, I better introduce who we are, who Equiculture is. There's myself, Stuart Myers, and my wife, Jane Myers, who's got a master's degree in equine science. So originally from the UK, as you can probably tell by the accent, we moved to Australia in the mid-90s, where we started to develop this system. So for the last 20 years plus actually, we've researched and presented on the subject of sustainable horsekeeping practices all over the world, mainly initially in the UK, Australia and New Zealand, but we've done either face-to-face or online presentations in places far afield as Russia, the US, Poland, Venezuela, South Africa, all corners of the world really. So between us we've got over 75 years of horsekeeping experience. Jane's had horses since she was a small child. She's competed in most forms of equine sport and disciplines over the years and taught riding, etc. For many years. I'm what's known in the community as a horse husband, so I'm married into the horse world. I don't have the horse gene, but it has enabled me to see things from a slightly different perspective, which I think has been an advantage over the years. Jane's got a master's degree in equine science, and she specialises in the grazing behaviour of equines. She did her research at the Royal Dick Veterinary College in Edinburgh, and then she taught equine science for 7 years at the University of Melbourne before we started on this journey. We see ourselves as specialists on the subject of the grazing behaviour of horses and how this affects their management. So we're not plant specialists, we're not soil specialists, but we know that when you start to work with natural systems while they work against them, things definitely improve. We know that once you understand how a horse is trying to interact with the land and work with that, you can start to make some really positive changes to the land management. So we've been successfully running Equiculture for over 20 years with thousands of followers and advocates worldwide. In 2012, we were awarded the Winston Churchill Fellowship to study environmentally sustainable horsekeeping practices. and we're the authors of numerous books on the subject of sustainable horsekeeping. So we teach people to be responsible, sustainable and ethical horsekeepers. We teach horse owners how to manage their land in a way that is good for the horses by improving their lifestyle and welfare, for people by saving them time, money and work, and for the environment by improving ground cover, biodiversity, soil health, water quality and creating a habitat for wildlife. It really is a true win-win-win scenario. So this concept originated in an extreme climate. So we moved to Australia. We bought our land. We bought a beautiful property, and we determined not to spoil it. The conditions are harsher, more extreme. It's either drought or flood. It's either 30, 40 degrees or it's freezing. They've got very poor, thin soil with very little topsoil. They've got fragile native grasses, and there's no native hoofed animals. So by observing the horse's behaviour, challenging existing paradigms and introducing elements of regenerative agriculture, permaculture and other influences, we developed a system that worked for the land and for the horses. We wrote a book. We were asked by CSIRO, which is a government scientific publishing house, to write a book. And then after we wrote the book, we were asked by various natural resource management agencies to share some of this information. So we started doing small talks initially. We didn't see this as a planned journey. It was just something that evolved around us. And we worked with natural resource management agencies such as Melbourne Water, South East Queensland Water Catchments, Healthy Land and Water, and various other organisations to develop and evolve and present this talk over the last 15-20 years. As we started taking the talk around the country, we realised that Australia's got many microclimates. There's varying from tropical to arid to temperate to alpine and everything in between to coastal environments. And what we realised is that the same principles apply virtually anywhere in the world. The horses put the same amount of pressure on the land, they do the same sort of things, and the way the land responds is the same. It's just in Australia, because the conditions are so harsh, things happen much more quickly than they do perhaps in Europe. So we developed a system called the Equicentral system, as you can see here, and this is just some examples. This is a property in Tasmania, which is very similar conditions to many parts of Europe. It's much cooler, wetter part of Australia than most of the mainland. As you can see, the property on the left here is before Laurel, who owns this property. This is how she used to keep the horses before. And on the right, only after a few years, you can see a dramatic change in the way that the land looks. If you switch to the UK, the picture on the left, you see that all the time. There's tracking lines there. It's really heavily overgrazed. There's an abundance of buttercups and things showing that the land is under pressure. And again, a very bare, eroded area around the gateway, very common. And then in winter, you get something on the right there with a huge sort of morass of mud, especially around the gateways and feeders. A very common sight in the UK. But it doesn't need to be like this. This is the same property that we show there on the right. After a few years of using the Equicentral system, this is what it's turned into. Again, a very, very different proposition to the previous sea of mud. So why do we get the short grass? Why do we get the mud and the weeds? And is there a more suitable alternative? Well, we think there is. We think we've developed a more suitable alternative, and it really is about just getting out there and educating horse owners into making some of these changes. So if you want to have a sustainable equine lifestyle, there's three things that you have to constantly balance, juggle and get them balanced. There's the environmental factors such as the soil, the wildlife, the clean water, etc. There's the human factors such as the budget, the ease of use, etc. How far from work, from school, what the kids are doing, etc. There's the equine factors such as their behaviour, their welfare, their health, their well-being. All these three things need to be in balance. If one or more is out of balance for whatever reason, it's not going to be sustainable. It's about getting them back into a more balanced proposition. And once we do this, we start to get all sorts of positive changes. And many of these changes we didn't see when we first started on this journey. When you start to change one thing, other things start to improve. So from the environmental factor, you get reduced soil loss, you get healthier soil, you get more land for wildlife. You get more carbon sequestration, you get cleaner water and healthier pasture, you get more vegetation, and you get less or no mud or dust. For a human factor, it becomes easier to use, it saves you time, it saves you money, and you get more quality time to spend with your horses. And for the horses themselves, they get less injuries, they get better health, they get what's called friends forage freedom, which is kind of the basic needs of horses in many ways, and you get better welfare outcomes. What it leads to is a better image for the horse industry. And just by focusing on just two things, the healthier soil and healthier pasture, if we just concentrate on these two things, there are so many spins off that happen, which we didn't see when we started this journey. So you get a reduced soil loss, you get cleaner water, you get more carbon sequestration, you get more land for wildlife, you get more vegetation, you get less mud or dust. As I said earlier, it becomes easier to use, saves you time, saves you money, and you get less injuries, better health, etc. So it's a win-win-win scenario all round once you start doing the right thing. But before we go any further, we need to understand what a horse is. It's a fairly unique animal. A horse is what's called a monogastric, that's a single-stomached herbivore. So even though they're sort of same shape and size as a cow, and they both eat grass, they are very different animals. People think they're just a funny shaped cow, and they're not. They're very, very different animals inside. A cow is what's called a ruminant. And so what a cow does is it uses its very long tongue and the roof of its mouth to pull up very long grass, to chew the grass. It chews the grass for a while, and after it's taken in a certain amount of grass, it will lie down, regurgitate some of that grass back up again, chew it again. So it processes that same mouthful of food several times a time. So what the cow is doing is extracting the maximum amount of nutrition out of each mouthful, but it has to spend several hours lying down doing this ruminating process. A horse doesn't ruminate. When a horse takes in a mouthful of grass, it goes through the system completely and out the other side in one go. It doesn't go backwards and forwards. But that means the horse doesn't take as many nutrients out of its mouthful that a cow does. So instead, a horse relies on a greater throughput, a greater volume of food in, because it takes less out of its mouthful. So when we compare pound for pound, a horse in the wild and a cow in the wild, the horse will ingest a greater volume of grass than the cow will. But like I said earlier, it takes less out of its mouthful. The flip side of that is because it's taking less nutrients out of its mouthful, what comes out the other end, the manure, is much more nutrient rich. So horses produce very nutrient rich manure, which is why gardeners and rose growers always prefer horse manure to cow manure, because it's much more nutrient rich. So the flip side of that again is the better quality food you put in one end, the better quality manure you get out of the other end. Okay. And horses are thought to have one of the longest grazing bouts of any animal out there. They've evolved to be chewing for a minimum of 12 hours a day, but they can push out their grazing behaviour, i.e. chewing and gathering, up to 15 to up to 20 hours a day if need be. So they use this to their advantage. So whereas cows have to spend several hours lying down to ruminate, horses can use this extra time to range further and to gather more resources, which enables horses to survive in environments that cows simply can't do, because when the food is scarce, they just spend more time in gathering than a cow could. And what horses tend to do, in fact many mammals tend to do this, but horses are really good at doing it, is they have a tendency to eat more food than they need when food is plentiful, in order to pile the pounds on, in order to store the energy for when times are harsh. So they'll pile the pounds on in spring and summer to get them through winter or a drought. Horses, in fact, the ultimate yo-yo dieters. They've evolved to pile the pounds on when food's good and lose it over winter, keep themselves warm. But many horse owners have kind of lost sight of that, and so what they tend to do is overfeed them in winter, rug them over winter. They don't lose that winter that stored fat over the winter time, so they remain constantly in a state of obesity, which leads to issues that we'll talk about further on. But they are the ultimate yo-yo dieters. They've also evolved to eat low energy plants over a large range. So this is quite important. Horses are basically a fibre processing machine. They've evolved to eat fibre. In the wild, they will seek out fibre over nutrition every single time. So they've evolved to eat high fibre, low protein, low energy grasses. In many ways, they've evolved to clean up after everything else. That's why they range far and far and wide, clean up everything that the cattle and sheep, etc., have left behind. But our modern horses, if you like, have developed a bit of an eating disorder and a bit of a sweet tooth in many ways, and have lost sight of that basic principle that in the wild, horses will seek out fibre over nutrition every single time. They're also a highly social herd animal. They've evolved to be with the horses. Modern practices is tending towards separating horses, which causes stresses to the horse, but also causes stresses to the land. But they've evolved to be with other horses. They're a highly social herd animal. I'm not going to go into this in any complexity because I'm going to go very simple, but there's a couple of things you need to understand about the horse. The first thing is, compared to its size, it's got a relatively small stomach, and into this small stomach, acid is constantly secreted into it. So horses haven't evolved to have a meal, they've evolved to be trickle feeders, the constant flow of fibre into that stomach. So because they're constantly taking fibre in, there's no need to turn that stomach acid off, so it's drip, drip, drip. We have meals, and when we have a meal, acid is secreted into our stomach to help digest it. Horses have a constant throughput of fibre, so it doesn't need to turn off. So if horses are being fed meals often and there's no fibre in there, the acid doesn't turn off and it can actually cause damage to the stomach. They also need fibre coming in to keep the whole system moving, so new fibre coming in pushes the existing fibre through the whole system. So again, having meals can cause blockages, what they call colic, so that's a really important factor to think about with horses. The second thing that really concerns you guys is the cecum or the appendix. Now, humans have appendix, and many people have them removed when they're young with no apparent problems, although science is starting to question that now. But a horse cannot survive without its appendix, without its cecum. The cecum is home for millions and millions of microorganisms which actually help the horse break down the really tough cellulose. Without those microorganisms, the horse cannot digest the cellulose. So without those microorganisms, the horse you could put as much food as you like into the horse and it would simply starve to death. So what's also really important, and science is showing more and more importance to this, is that not only the volume of microorganisms in there that's important, but the biodiversity of the microorganisms that are in there. Now, these microorganisms adapt to different foodstuffs. So the more different foodstuffs the horse is eating, then the more biodiverse the gut biome is. So the more biodiversity the horses have access to, the more different plants they eat, the more biodiverse the gut system is, therefore the healthier the gut system is. So that's one way that you can actually work with horse owners to do that, is the more different foodstuffs they eat, the healthier the gut biome is, the healthier the horse is. And they get the variety of microorganisms from the diversity of food, but they also get it from the healthy soils as well. So again, healthy soils help the gut biome as well. So two things you can really play on: the importance of the health of the gut biome in relation to the health of the soils and the biodiversity of the pasture. So even the horses graze between 12 and 15 hours a day, they don't do that non-stop. They tend to graze in what's called a grazing bout, and it tends to last between 1.5 to 3 hours with a healthy horse, I'll emphasize with a healthy horse, and stops when the fibre content indicates the stomach is full. So it's the volume of fibre in the stomach that says to the horse, I'm full. However, again, we've skewed many of our domestic horses and they've got an eating disorder, and that switch doesn't work as well as it should do. But a horse in the wild will stop when the fibre, not the nutrition content, indicates the stomach is full. So fibre, fibre, fibre every time. So they eat to fill up and maintain a high gut fill level. They want a certain volume of fibre in there to keep the whole system moving. They don't want too much because then they become too fat, too bloated, and they can't run away from predators. But if there's no pasture to eat, they will simply just stand around. But they'll also do that when they finish the grazing bout. So they'll see the horses there standing around the gateways. So they need that pasture to make them move. So standing around the gateways, this horse is either just being fed or it's waiting to be fed. This is where Meals on Wheels comes from. So they spend an extraordinary amount of time around the gateways because that's where the rich resources come from. And this is a behaviour that causes problems, but we can actually use that to help our management further on. So the favourite spot is by the gate where Meals on Wheels comes from, and that increases that erosion around the gateways. But we can start to use that behaviour to help us once we understand how that works. You see, this picture illustrates it really, really well here. There's three pastures there illustrated with the arrows. You can see the 2 dots in the middle of the screen, which are the horses, and they're hanging around in the same spot in every paddock, and that same spot is closest to where the house is, which is in the bottom left-hand corner of the picture there. So they're standing as close as they can to where Meals on Wheels arrive several times a day when they're not grazing. So that causes that wear and tear along that fence line, around gateways, etc. This is a really, really easy thing to fix. I can fix this in seconds flat once I get to a property, but again, it's a behaviour that we can use to our advantage once we understand how it works. So when we look at the grazing characteristics of horses, they're able to eat right down to the ground due to having 2 sets of incisors. So they've got 2 sets of incisors that meet in the middle like a pair of scissors. Unlike a cow, like I said earlier, that uses the tongue and the roof of its mouth to pull up relatively long grass, the horse has got the equipment to eat grass no matter how short it gets. They can eat the grass down to the ground and beyond. And because modern horse owners tend to, not all, but tend to keep the horse on short and shorter grass, thinking this is going to restrict their intake, and it doesn't, because horses have got the equipment to eat grass as short as you like. They've got the equipment to vacuum up every morsel of fibre from a pasture if they need to do. So again, keeping them on short grass doesn't help in any way at all. But they are very efficient at what they do. They're very efficient grazers. They are able to survive in almost any climate in the world. But this high level of efficiency results in less and less grass over time because they didn't evolve to be kept in one place. So all horsekeeping is about compromise. We have to look at compromises, and all horsekeeping is, I don't care whether you've got 2 acres or 2,000 acres, it is about compromise. The problem is that everyone makes the wrong compromises these days, and what we teach is the compromise that work, the compromise that you can make to be beneficial rather than ones that you take that will be detrimental. But every way we keep a horse is a compromise. So what we want is longer and more fibrous grasses, longer and healthier root systems, on healthier soils, good ground cover, more biodiversity, and ironically, so do the horses. But again, we've kind of lost sight of that a little bit in the modern horse community. So with some education on the advantages of these points and challenging existing common knowledge, we can start to turn around. And the exciting thing is, once horse owners get it, there can be real positive custodians of the land, because horses thrive in a biodiversity environment. Horse owners unfortunately don't know that yet, but that's what they've evolved to be, in a really good ecosystem. So again, horse owners can be really good once they understand how it all fits together. Well, there are some issues preventing them from doing this, so I'm going to touch them very, very briefly. I guess one of the biggest issue is traditional practices. You know, we've kept horses for thousands of years, but certainly in the last 500 years, how we've kept them has been very human focused. No thoughts about the land, no thoughts about the horse. It's all about making life easier for humans. So again, we have to challenge traditional practices, because if you go on any large stud or any existing property, then it's very, very traditional in what they do, which is not about looking after the land, and it's not in the best interest of the horse either. There's peer pressure. You know, there's so many keyboard warriors out there telling you what you should and shouldn't be doing. It takes a very brave or very committed or very open-minded person to make a change away from the norm. So that's a huge factor to deal with. They get a perceived lack of space or facilities. People think they haven't got enough land to make changes, but what they don't understand is when you start to make some positive changes, your land becomes more productive and healthier, and so you need less space than you've currently got. There's a lack of knowledge out there. They don't understand how it all fits together. That results in a lack of confidence to change. And again, social media is a big culprit in this. Again, you start to make changes and people start to question what you're doing, start to critique what you're doing rather than seeing it through. Because these changes initially will be harder, but they do get easier. But it's during that transition period that the confidence to continue can be challenged. There's genuine fear of working with agencies like you guys work with. A genuine fear of that because of the fear of legislation. You know, it's you know, they're going to come along and make us spray these weeds out and do this and fix fences and do etc. 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 So we need to understand this. I think this is where we can do a really good job. Is sitting in the middle of horse owners and large organisations, explaining that it's beneficial for both to work together really well. And once horse owners have made that connection, again, they're really positive in some of the things that they're doing. On the flip side is their perception of the lack of knowledge of farm advisors, etc. They come along and through no fault of their own, they've got a background in perhaps like agronomy, used to dealing with farmers and cattle and sheep, which are very, very different to horses and their owners. And so unless they understand the particular needs, the particular beliefs of the horse community, then they're going to come across a huge barrier there. And perhaps the biggest barrier they're going to come across is the whole laminitis equine obesity issue. It's a very big and complicated issue, not easy to fix, but unless you understand some elements of it, you're not going to be able to proceed. So laminitis and obesity, it is a big issue. It's a huge issue. It's possibly the biggest issue in the horse world at the moment. It's a very confusing issue. It's very divisive. It's very emotive. Unless you've got a handle on some of the issues concerned with it, it's going to cause you big problems in dealing with the horse community. It's a very complex issue. No one understands all the causes. It's linked to certain things, but there are so many potential causes out there. Again, it's a very emotive issue, very divisive. It's something that you need to get a little bit of a handle on, or you won't be able to progress very far in working with the equine community. Again, to add to the complexity, there's a lot of half-truths out there. Again, the keyboard warriors, lots of things about it, lots of half-truths, but no one fully understands everything to do with it. It forces the horse owner, because it affects the hooves and causes lameness, and it forces owners to become very hoof-centric, focusing on the hoof, not on the wider picture, not on how everything comes together. So again, they tend to narrow down on just the issue being about looking after the hooves, which is certainly important, but unless you address the wider issues, you're never going to get on top of it. There are many causes, but it's often linked to obesity and fructans in grasses, but not exclusively, but this is certainly a large factor. Once they get it, it can be very difficult to manage, and it causes sleepless nights and lots of pain and grief for the horse itself. We do cover laminitis obesity in more depth and how it affects land management in our workshops. But what horse owners tend to do, their line of thought, how they process, how they deal with this issue, is first of all, if it's linked to obesity, and remember it's not exclusively linked to obesity, but it's certainly a factor, their first line of thought is we should reduce or eliminate the grass intake. We keep them on short or in some cases no grass whatsoever. In theory, they do this to lose weight, but they don't, because they've got the equipment to eat very short grass, so no matter how short the grass is, they don't lose weight, and there's other factors into play as well. This results in overgrazing. It can result in a deliberate removal of grass and topsoil, again to eliminate the grass, and it certainly damages the soil biome. And in more extreme cases, it can lead to a property like this where there's not a blade of grass at all. The horse is on, in fact, they're on a series of tracks, if you like, in this case, concentric rings. Sometimes the middle of the property is kind of left ungrazed and it can become a bit more biodiverse, but the horses have little, if any, access to that fresh grass. So what we need to do is educate horse owners. We need to educate them about the benefits of longer fibrous pasture and to help them create such a pasture. We do this by reducing grazing pressure and by allowing the horses to self-regulate carefully. Now, this is a difficult process. It's not something you can just suddenly switch from short grass to long grass. It's fraught with danger. It's an ongoing process to teach the horses and the land to self-regulate. But when we start to reduce the grazing pressure, this leads to an increase in grass length, improved soil health and biodiversity. And the biodiversity has many other benefits for the health of the horses, as we talked about earlier. It improves the health of the gut biome. So we need to educate our horse owners on the benefits of the rest and rotation on the pasture and the horse's health. So the longer the sward, the healthier the root system, the healthier the soil biome. The roots open up the soil, allowing air and water and nutrients to penetrate. It creates an increase in the health and biodiversity of the soil microflora and fauna. And this healthy soil biome adds to the health of the horse's gut biome. So it's a win-win all round again. And rotational grazing, which was kind of a key component of what we're going to talk about, increases biodiversity by giving those plants that are less able to cope with close grazing a chance to thrive and survive, set seed and multiply. So the horses will actually help the health of the plants because they effectively prune shrubs and bushes, because even though they eat grass, predominantly also nibble on leaves and twigs and bark and a whole range of different things. So if allowed not to overgraze, they actually just prune the shrubs and bushes, making them thicker and healthier and stronger if they don't overgraze that area. It also decreases the parasitic worms on your pasture, so again it's beneficial for the horse's health as well. So horses are not just grazers, but they're also browsers and foragers. They predominantly eat grass, but they also nibble bark, twigs, bushes, berries, herbs, forbs, rushes, etc., etc., etc. They've even been seen to eating a few mouthfuls of carrion. In winter, they naturally turn to an even more fibrous diet, because breaking down fibre keeps you warm from the inside in much the same way that we have porridge in winter. The fibre helps us to warm us from the inside. So they get a more fibrous diet of branches and twigs and leaves and gorse and blackberry and things. So we can engage with horse owners in the planting of trees and bushes and hedgerows, living fences, to encourage this behaviour in winter. So this creates an opportunity for natural resource managers to engage with horse owners on the benefits on a practical level. So this bottom photograph is a photo of a new aquaculture site where Wildlife Trust volunteers planted over 2,500 trees and shrubs with the long-term aim of helping that biodiversity for the land and for the horse as well. We also encourage horse owners to look after waterways, and perhaps the most beneficial thing that we can do to benefit the waterways and improve the health of the land is to create a healthy, biodiverse sward and create healthy riparian zones. The longer sward traps nutrients and prevents the runoff. Then we can encourage the growth of more old-fashioned grass species and other beneficial plants which don't require fertiliser and are healthier for the horses. We can allow horses access to waterways, but on a limited basis. This helps to assist the biodiversity as well. So to reduce grazing pressure, which is an important thing that we need to do, so at any given time of the year, the grass will either be too long or too short, the grass will be too wet or too dry, and the horse will be too fat or too thin. Farmers, when in good years and bad years, they vary their stocking levels to suit. Horse owners cannot and do not. So it's no good I say to a horse owner, you've got too many horses on here, they're not going to listen to you. You have to find ways of regulating the animals that they've got in there because they're not going to sell them in a bad year. In fact, they have to take on more in bad years. So to do this, we need somewhere to hold the horses whilst reducing the pressure. So aquaculture introduces a vital concept of loafing areas for horse owners, i.e. somewhere where the horses can be when the land is not ready to take more horses. So again, in wet times, in dry times, in winter, the horses can stand in a safe, dry environment to take the pressure off the land. But horses are really good at actually creating biodiverse grassland if they're managed well. They're used extensively in conservation grazing projects, and it's been shown repeatedly that horses can and do improve pasture. But there's a very, very fine line between aiding biodiversity and overgrazing. So we have to keep the horses to one side of the line, because if they cross that line, then they can be hard on land. But if we manage them well, they can be really good at creating good biodiverse grassland. That is why they're used around the world for conservation projects, conservation grazing projects, sorry. In the talk we talk about different grazing systems, and we can't go through them all today, we don't have time, but we talk about set stocking which is not desirable, We talk about rotational grazing, which is the one that we should be aiming for. We talk about limited grazing, strip grazing, and cross grazing, all that we cover in more depth in our full talk. Very quickly, a little bit about horse owners, because they are quite unique, but there are, even with the horse owners, there's 3 distinct groups, and within that there's subgroups too. But just to generally classify them simply for you, there's a racing industry, which is very traditional, where horses are seen very much as a commodity. There's competitive events and dressage riders, etc., where they're very much driven by peer-driven models and the need to compete. Again, very traditional in many ways. And the third group, which is often the easiest to work with, which are often once you get across to them some of the things that will be beneficial, are often the easiest to work with, are your hobby riders and niche commercial enterprises. And you'll be surprised that there are far more of them than you actually think out there. We also talk about manure management in our main talk, which is really, really important, because one horse will produce 8 to 10 tons of manure a year, and you have to do something with that. Like I said earlier, well-fed horses produce a higher quality manure, so the better quality feed you put in one end, the better quality manure you're going to get out the other end. Within the horse community, there's a very skewed fear of worms and the manure that obviously that contains the worms, resulting in the overuse of wormers. Again, this came about by misinformation by worming paste manufacturers, but also the social media, etc. But again, our talk addresses some of this thing and vastly reduces the reliance on worming chemicals. So many horses set stock and therefore have to poop it. So this fear of worms and the worm burden, and the fact they've set stock, many horse owners poop pick, and they've got to do something with the manure that they collect. So we open a dialogue with horse owners about how better management can minimise the use of wormers. We talk about composting and reusing manure, and why you should encourage dung beetles. So how can sustainability be achieved? Well, kind of a bit of a checklist for horse owners. It's not going to happen overnight. It's not. We can't give you a magic pill or magic formula. We can't give horse owners this thing that's going to change things overnight. It's a process. It's an ongoing process, but you have to start somewhere. Initially, it becomes more difficult. Each passing year, it gets easier and easier as both the land and the horses begin to self-regulate. So in many cases, you have to take a step back to take 2 steps forwards. We encourage people to take on a concept called becoming grass farmers, talking about your property being a grass farm, and your aim is to encourage healthy grasses for your horses by becoming a grass farmer. We also talk about developing a mindset of improvement rather than maintenance. So most horse properties are at best, and I say this with a big underline, are at best maintain themselves, mostly going downhill. But we talk about how just by making small changes and just improving things here and there by 5 or 10% a year, you'll start to develop a mindset of improvement rather than maintenance. And this is where informed compromises are essential. So we've developed a system called the Equicentral system, and we call it a management system for the 21st century because horses today our domestic horses are different to any time they have been in history. They're run by different groups of people, different socio-economic groups. They do less work than they've ever done in history. People tend to have more horses, so we have to change the way we manage them from what was happened in previous centuries to how horsekeeping is in the 21st century. And the Equicentral system combines the natural and domesticated behaviour of horses with good land management practices including rotational grazing, and it creates a healthy and sustainable property for your horses, the land and the wider environment. So horses and their owners can be a positive influence on the land. They just need their awareness raised and support through transition. Horses actually thrive in a biodiverse environment, and if well managed, they can complement a diverse ecosystem. But there are some key issues that need addressing. Foremost and potentially the most difficult is the issue of long grass versus more feed versus laminitis. But, however, and this is really good news, there is a small but significant shift in the thinking of horse owners looking for a more holistic approach to horse management. We can support that shift, enabling horses once again to become part of an ecosystem and not separate to it. An aquaculture offer your organisation, we can offer a couple of things. We can offer workshops and training days for horse owners, and start to open a dialogue about biodiversity and soil health, about maintaining ground cover, protecting waterways, about horse health and welfare, and creating a true win-win scenario, saving them time, money and effort, enabling happy, healthy horses and promoting a healthy environment. Also create training days for natural resource managers and farm advisors on how to better equine management affects soil health and biodiversity, about what is a horse and what is an owner, about how to get past choke points, i.e. laminitis, what trigger points to use for engagement, what resources and support they need, and a run through of key points from our horse owners talk that you need to understand. Thank you for listening. I've only been able to scratch the surface today because there's a huge amount of information out there, but if we can help you in any way, please get in touch. So have a look at our website, which is www.aquaculture.net, and if you're interested in anything we've talked about today, just send us an email at jane@aquaculture.net or stuart@aquaculture.net. Thanks very much for listening. I hope you got something out of it, and I hope to see you at some point in the future. Goodbye.
Really interesting presentation from Stuart Myers there. Thank you so much. That was really good. And I wanted to just take this opportunity to give you a few more slides just to finish off, to summarize how we are trying to take things forward and how we're trying to get the sustainable horse management message out there to the masses across Cornwall and beyond. So from my own point of view, the Upstream Thinking Project's point of view, both our staff and our volunteers, we have directly experienced the changes brought about by the use of aquaculture methods and principles, and have chosen to publicly advocate for this method of equine management. We've managed to secure funding support from Catchment Sensitive Farming, and through that we have secured Stuart Myers' time to deliver 4 more public workshops, actually on the ground, face to face, geographically spread across Cornwall, several hours each, and these will be tailored for horse owners with a different emphasis to today's presentation. These will be over 2 weekends in early 2024, and the workshops will be on the weekend of the 16th and 17th of March and the following 23rd and 24th of March. And as I said, these will be spread across the county to ensure maximum public attendance if possible. In addition, the Catchment Sensitive Farming funding has also secured Stuart's time to deliver 2 additional professional land management advisors workshops between those weekends, one near Truro on Tuesday the 19th of March and another somewhere in and around the Tamar Valley on the Thursday the 21st of March. And again, those will be more detailed than today's presentation. In addition, myself and Rick Pedrick, who I must say, I'll take this opportunity to thank Rick for her work and helping us to get to grips with aquaculture in principle on her site, and also thanks to Rick for helping to make these slides look far more professional than I would have managed. She certainly did a good job with those. We are doing a combined effort to write an article for the December winter issue of Cornwall Wildlife Trust's Wild Cornwall magazine, which is basically an introduction to sustainable horse management. And this article will be for the 17,000 membership, and hopefully that will enthuse them to generate landowner interest and encourage attendees to those March workshops. And we also intend to engage with Cornish and Southwest regional media, both press and radio, to discuss sustainable horse management following aquaculture principles and to promote the forthcoming workshops. And we have had some interest from Countryfile, which we will certainly plan to follow up. And finally, a recorded copy of this webinar will be posted on Cornwall Wildlife Trust's YouTube page for those of you who want to watch it again and for those of you who couldn't attend today. And of course, the link can be forwarded to colleagues or other contacts you think might be interested. The address is www.youtube.com/@Cornwall with a capital C Wildlife capital W film. And for further information or to discuss the rollout of workshops potentially in your own counties, please get in contact with Aquaculture Direct, either on their website at www.aquaculture.net or via email at jane@aquaculture.net. Okay, thanks very much for attending today. Hope you enjoyed it. Please get involved. Please get sustainable horse management on the map in your area, and together we can do great things. Thank you.